Following the American invasions and occupations of Afghanistan and Iraq in the early 2000s, the bulk of my academic work focused on the question of nation building. I produced two books, the 2004 book, State Building, Governance and World Order in the 21st Century, and then the 2006 edited volume, Nation Building Beyond Afghanistan and Iraq. The bottom line conclusions of this work were pretty simple. A, that nation building was extremely hard and required substantial buy-in from the local stakeholders. Second, that the United States was not very good at this process because it didn't really understand the importance of the state and state capacity. And finally, that the American public grew tired of these exercises after a few years, way before the process really could be completed, which meant that the United States needed to get pretty serious about whether it really wanted to engage in these exercises in the first place. I stopped working on this a few years later because it seemed to me that following the debacle in Iraq, the United States was not about to get involved in any further nation-building exercises. So, to my surprise, 20 years later, here we are with the United States embarking on a similar sort of exercise in Venezuela after the kidnapping or the capture of Nicolas Maduro by the Trump administration. This, of course, is very ironic given the fact that Trump had campaigned against nation building and against the forever wars that his predecessors had gotten the country into, but nonetheless he has put himself in a position where he's going to get sucked into a very, very similar exercise. So one thing to say at the outset is that the way that Trump has gone about this is very precarious. Trump has chosen what might be called nation-building light. That is to say, he has simply decapitated the Maduro regime and seems intent, although he's admitted that he might have to put boots on the ground, he does not seem to be prepared to really occupy physically any part of Venezuela. He wants to run the country by remote control from Washington. He's rejected the idea of building a democratic, legitimate government in Venezuela. Instead, he's aligned himself with Delcy Rodriguez, the former vice president who's now acting president of Venezuela, who is a radical Marxist at one point and completely aligned with the Maduro administration, but she apparently has agreed to work with him at least for the time being. This, of course, just as a matter of global order, is a terrible decision to openly say that your motive in doing all of this is simply to be able to pump billions of dollars worth of oil out of the ground in Venezuela. It essentially gives permission for everybody to go back to a 19th century world of naked imperialism where military power is used to acquire territory and extract natural resources from weaker countries. That's something that obviously gives permission to Russia and China to do something similar in their respective spheres of influence. But I don't want to talk about the impact on global order for the time being. I want to talk about the likelihood that the Trump exercise could actually lead to success, and I think for a variety of reasons it's very unlikely to do that. There are several reasons to think that this kind of nation-building light is going to run into very severe difficulties. One of the bottom line conclusions of earlier nation-building exercises is something called mission creep. That is to say, you get involved thinking you're going to limit your exposure. Unexpected things happen, which then force you to get more and more involved because you're unable to otherwise control the flow of events in the local country. And I think the Trump administration has put itself in a position where this is very likely to happen. Now, the reasons for being skeptical that nation-building light is going to work are several. The first one begins with the economy. Trump says that he wants oil. He wants American oil companies to invest. At one point he said, in his meeting with the oil company executives, he wanted them to invest $100 billion to get the Venezuelan oil industry running again. They, in turn, were extremely skeptical of this idea. They've been burned on these kinds of investments before. They understand how difficult and expensive it would be to revive the Venezuelan oil industry. This is happening at a time when there's actually a surplus of oil in global markets, unlike the situation maybe back in the 1950s or 60s, where Trump still seems to be living. The world does not need Venezuelan oil. A lot of people don't understand that the United States is actually now the world's largest oil producer. It exports, doesn't import oil. It's not dependent on anybody's oil. And so oil from Venezuela is not going to relieve us of a dependency we may have had a couple of decades ago. And what the CEOs of these big oil companies told him directly was that they're not going to put their own money at risk until the political situation has settled down and they know that they can operate under something that looks like a rule of law where they can get their money out of the country, something they've not been able to do previously. And so just the minimal effort to build an intervention around the need to get Venezuelan oil is itself going to be extremely difficult to bring about. The second difficulty is that given the blockade that's been imposed on Venezuela, its inability to sell oil to its normal customers in China and elsewhere, there's going to be a humanitarian crisis. The Venezuelan economy, which has produced 8 million refugees over recent years, is going to get even worse. There may be riots, there may be violence, there's still a sharp degree of polarization between the bulk of the population and the militants, the security apparatus on which Nicolas Maduro's power used to rest. And it's not clear that from the distance, all the way in Washington without boots on the ground, that the United States is going to be able to do much to control that violence. Another issue really has to do with the 8 million people that were driven out of the country because of its mismanagement, poverty, chaos, corruption under the previous Chavez and Maduro regimes. That's put a lot of pressure on all of Latin America, where these refugees have gone, especially to neighbors like Colombia and Ecuador. But even as far away as Chile, these migrants have been extremely destabilizing, and there's a whole lot of them in the United States. Donald Trump at an earlier point inveighed against them, saying that they were a bunch of drug dealers and terrorists. And you would think that he would want to create conditions under which as many of those refugees would go home as possible, but they are not going to want to go home unless they have some basic assurance that they can lead decent lives in the United States. By the way, in terms of the oil industry in particular, PDVSA, the state oil company in Venezuela, had really been stripped of its capacity when it was politicized under Hugo Chavez, and those oil engineers would be absolutely critical to restore the capacity of Venezuela to anything like what it was before the Bolivarian Revolution took place. And again, none of this is going to happen without basic security, without the resolution of the political polarization that has plagued the country for the last 20 years. So it could be that this actually provides a certain way forward, and it really has to do with the question of legitimacy. Legitimacy is not a luxury that only rich democracies can afford by holding elections and following democratic and rule of law procedures. It's actually a source of power because a legitimate government is one that will be obeyed, whose authority actually receives consensus support in the population, and it's something that Venezuela does not have at the present moment. And it could just be that at a certain point, both Donald Trump and perhaps some of the remnants of the old Chavista regime will realize that they need stability, and that stability is only going to come through democratic legitimacy. And that means that perhaps sometime down the road it will be necessary to hold elections again. The last election in 2024 was stolen. Maria Corina Machado was not allowed to run. She was the most popular politician in Venezuela, attracted huge crowds. Her proxy, Edmundo Gonzalez, did win the election. We know this because the opposition kept careful tallies at all of the polling places throughout Venezuela, and he was able to get a substantial majority, which was then nullified by the actions of the Maduro regime. Another election could bring a democratically legitimated regime to power. It's going to be very difficult because the remnants of the old regime will resist through force and violence any kind of democratic outcome. But that is something that the United States could affect if it uses its power and its leverage carefully. For example, to demand the presence of OAS election observers throughout the country, or to put its own people, its own election observers in to make sure that a future election is free and fair. Whether this can happen is a really dicey thing, because Trump at the moment does not seem to have any interest in a democratic Venezuela, and of course the existing regime has no interest in this either. And it may be that the only way to get to this point is through the situation, the physical situation on the ground in the country, to get much, much worse. And there are a number of reasons for thinking that this may be true. One clear lesson from the earlier nation-building exercises is that security is the #1 priority in stabilizing a country. It's more important in the first instance than democracy. And it's hard to see how you're actually going to get to security without further involvement by the United States, and this is one of the reasons why I think there's actually likely to be some real mission creep as we proceed forward. Another thing that I am particularly concerned about is that even under the most favorable circumstances, if you can get to a new election and if the Democratic opposition actually succeeds in winning and coming to power, whether they will be able to actually govern the country. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of experience in other situations like this, in Ukraine, in Egypt, and many other places where you did have an opposition coming out of civil society, but they really did not understand how to exercise power as a legitimate democracy, and therefore were quickly driven out of office or overwhelmed by that task. And so there's a lot of prior work that needs to be done in mobilizing the technocrats, the people that understand the economy, that understand security, getting them ready to actually come back to Venezuela and to help a new regime take power. All of that is a tall order. I'm not sure that this administration understands exactly how difficult all of this is going to be. I don't think Americans are any more aware of the importance of state capacity than previous administrations were, given that they've been busy trying to dismantle as much American, U.S. state capacity as possible. But we have to hope that there is going to be a way forward, because a stable, peaceful Venezuela is not just morally justified by the needs of the people of Venezuela, but it is also an important element of power, and it is one that needs to be exercised in an appropriate manner. Thanks very much for listening. If you appreciated the video, please subscribe to Frankly Fukuyama. There's both a written blog and a YouTube channel of the same title, so like and subscribe the video if you can. Thanks very much for listening.